Welcome to the MR2 Insights Podcast, where we explore the world of technology and speak with industry leaders about their experience and insights. I'm your host, James Gamble. I have over 15 years of experience in the industry, ranging from starting a help desk job all the way to your IT management. And on this show, we like to dive into the latest trends, hottest debates, and biggest challenges facing the tech industry today. On this show, I'd like to introduce my guest today, Mac McClenathan. How you doing today, sir?
Very well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having. Why don't you take this time, kind of give a little background about yourself? How'd you get into the tech industry, and how'd you join the company you're at today?
Oh, that's actually kind of a long story. I got into the tech industry a little on accident. I was looking for opportunities. I'm from Oregon originally. Opportunities to move to Nashville as a musician, but I wanted to be the first musician to ever move to Nashville with a job. So I was looking for companies that had a footprint in both so I can start and ultimately transfer. And that's kind of what I ended up doing with Verizon, kind of progressed from there.
How did you fall into the tech industry from a musician standpoint?
Well, I was looking for somewhere that I could transfer. So I was born and raised Eugene, Oregon, and got into Verizon Wireless just because I knew they had stores in the Nashville area and I was going to move there at some point. So that was kind of what drew me there. And then ultimately I ended up doing that. I moved with Verizon out to Nashville, landed in Brentwood, Tennessee, worked across the street from a business park, got recruited by a network company called Paytech at the time. Ultimately it got gobbled up by Windstream. And then from there, worked with some guys that started Green Cloud, went to Green Cloud, had to learn the cloud industry. And then ultimately we bought a managed security company and then we got acquired by 1111. So that's the last 15 years in a nutshell.
Oh, okay. That's an interesting path to where you currently are today. I didn't start off as a musician though, but I started off as doing minor tech support for friends who got their AOL accounts hacked. I used to get my dad's account hacked almost on a weekly basis. And to the point before I used to get in trouble, I figured out how to fix it before I get in trouble. And then I found out my friends pretty much do the same thing. And so I started a little size business, $10, I won't hack your account type of thing. So I then, 25 years later, here we are. That's awesome. So 1111, why don't you give a quick background of what they do and who they are?
Yeah, so 1111, the name hasn't been around all that long, a couple of years. Started out in New Jersey, came from a carrier background, and the vision really is to blend cloud connectivity and managed security together. I think a lot of times organizations, you get multiple vendors going in different directions and finger pointing, and all of the cloud and connectivity and managed security components all logically connect. So why not build an organization around that to make them integrate more seamlessly, to get visibility basically on all the the speeds and feeds from the network, the infrastructure metrics, and then all the relevant security outputs kind of all in one place. So that's what 1111 was built to do. And subsequently bought a bunch of organizations to fill in those pillars, right? The cloud side is largely filled through the Green Cloud and Island acquisitions, and most recently even SunGuard. We bought some assets, not the whole thing. And then network, they spun up pretty organically out of the Northeast, and we did some smaller tuck-in acquisitions. And then on the managed security side, Green Cloud had acquired a group called Cascade Defense out of the Northwest a couple of years ago. So that kind of became the security pillar. And now we're just growing those and merging them together.
So infrastructure as a service and some of those other platform as a service type of methodologies is kind of what I'm hearing to kind of offer.
Yeah, primarily it's a VMware-based cloud infrastructure. So if you're talking about production hosting, definitely heavy on the VMware side. The acquisition of the SunGuard Cloud and managed services team brought us some capabilities around the management and some value-added service around the hyperscalers, primarily Azure and AWS. But our largest cloud deployments have been around VMware for sure.
Gotcha. And I know you kind of mentioned a little bit of how everybody has different clients and probably like a handful of things that they have in their organization and stuff. But what do you see that might be kind of majority of the common issues that you see, but what are some of the common issues you see with people kind of going to the cloud?
Oh, well, then I got to ask you, how do you define cloud? That's kind of the maybe the most common misconceptions. Azure, Microsoft, AWS, obviously they did a lot to advertise and drive activity and interest in hosting in general. So we even preceded, the Azure cloud. I mean, Green Cloud, where I came from, had a functioning infrastructure as a service before Microsoft did. So they did a lot to help kind of move the needle and build acceptance around the model. It took a really long time, I would say. I don't know if we were early, but it sure felt that way, trying to get the legacy IT guys to give up control and not be able to see the equipment, right?
Yep.
But challenges now, as far as going to the hyperscalers, we'll define them that way, as far as like Azure, AWS, and GCP. There's a lot of work to do to move there, right? If you've got infrastructure running in VMware now and applications that are built for and running in that type of environment, to move them to Azure or AWS requires a ton of work and refactoring the applications to function the way that they do. And I don't think anyone really knows what they're signing up for before they go and do that, right? So they're moving there with the assumption that it will get figured out along the way, and a lot of times it doesn't. And now we're at the point where we're actually starting to see, and maybe hear the term more frequently about repatriation, where organizations are looking and saying, okay, I got a couple years running in AWS or Azure. It's not what I planned on paying. So is there someone out there that can help us figure out what, if anything, does it make sense to move back? And does it make sense to leave something there, right? So what's the story about those blended environments, multi-cloud environments, again, which we're seeing more and more? And those are starting to be some really interesting and design conversations that we've been able to be a part of.
The multi-cloud terminology and stuff, that's something that I'm even starting to look into, or even trying to grasp that concept of it. Everybody in their own cloud has their own type of like geo redundancy and like different type of just redundancy paths. And I hear the term multi-cloud as used in order to have, well, just kind of like diversify as far as your cloud posture kind of goes. To have, if you have something in Azure and if anything goes down, it goes up to AWS, or even, systems such as like 1111.
Sure.
For instance.
Yeah. Well, was that a question?
Well, I guess kind of more or less a statement for in that sense. You mentioned as far as the definition of cloud, actually, and that is a very that actually makes a lot of sense, because some people, I think, they have their standard regular infrastructure that they have, and we'll go very simple as far as just having a couple of on-prem servers, and their definition of kind of going to the cloud is simply just having those not having those on-prem servers and moving them to the cloud to have two VMwares and stuff, two VM systems in the cloud, to be having that can be considered cloud. Other aspects of where you kind of take that next evolution, I think, is to use some of the platform as a service or software as a service models on the cloud, to either use some of like your function apps, your serverless applications, and even from a big point, really the security aspect as far as like managed security. What are some of the things I think that 1111 would do for as far as a managed security solution?
On the managed security side, if you kind of zoom out and look at the NIST cybersecurity framework and how we align there. I mean, the way that we like to tell the story, just to make it more consumable, honestly, because there's so many moving parts and there's a lot of different ways you can do it. Everybody's got some investment and some kind of tooling that they're using internally at varying degrees of success. So if we simplify it and look at identify, protect, detect, respond, recover in that context, we're approaching it with on the identification side, a little bit more around where the vulnerabilities exist, right? So what, if any, tool sets are in place today to help an organization identify the published vulnerabilities present in their environment? And I think if you spent any time in the space, you understand that there's like 200,000 almost, I think, the last time I looked, published vulnerabilities. 100% of organizations have one of those or hundreds of those present. The biggest question is, how do you figure out which ones are critical and need attention? And again, the last stat I read on that was in the 4% range. So you've got this needle in the haystack of a lot of research that someone internally is being asked to do to, okay, let's figure out what the vulnerabilities are, and then let me dig out what the priority should be for addressing them, and then the steps to take to remediate them. Our tooling kind of helps with that, right? So we're scanning the environment, looking for published vulnerabilities, ultimately prioritizing them, and then giving them context and steps to take for remediation. So that's the identification side. If you move to the protection front, Again, that can mean a lot of different things and touches a lot of different areas. To us, that is really the gate, the moat, what is around the edge. We start working through the managed firewall oftentimes, which, funny enough, we look at the managed firewall, or I guess approach that from a security standpoint. But oftentimes, the more we dig in, the more we find that organizations really lack networking expertise. So the networking element of the firewall, typically acting as the primary router, especially in the SMB space, we've won opportunities and had a lot of success just talking about network cleanup as the base layer there. And then you get into, who's responsible for maintaining the UTM feature functionalities and what happens to those logs and who's looking at them. In our case, we're actually ingesting those logs up through our analyzer, and our SOC is getting a look at, here we're going to down select all these false positives, or the noisy alerts rather. And then if we identify something more critical, most commonly someone's running a Bitcoin server, in a remote office somewhere.
Yep.
We're identifying those and kind of helping them figure it out, right? And then that could even extend to switches and APs. I'll pause because there's a couple other pillars and I've said a lot of words, but
yeah, that's a lot of. It's funny. It's as far as like a network or firewall type of thing. I've seen that often too in different concepts. Typically like kind of mom and pop stores like restaurant chains or stuff like that, where they have like multiple firewalls per location that they have, and they don't have any type of config management to kind of maintain a certain baseline configuration. So each one of them can kind of be a little bit different, and if you don't have a solid way to kind of manage those different either firmwares or baseline configurations, kind of like you said, a lot of that from a vulnerability perspective where they left themselves open to either some type of attack kind of more or less comes from that firewall stance.
Oh yeah. And again, the easiest question to identify is who's responsible for maintaining these today. And I think the old carrier model, like you look at the telecoms that did the managed firewall, that firmware upgrade, moves, adds, changes were the core of that offering. Ours does go a little bit more where we start to dig into the higher level security feature functionality and actively looking at it from a SOC perspective. So it's started a bunch of really interesting conversations, but went backwards to me. When you lead with security, you end up in the network. That was a bit of a surprise. But
yeah, sure. No, I can see that. I don't honestly even see in today's space. I mean, I guess it's still kind of, I almost see like that network admin as a dying job. I don't know if you kind of consider that or not though, but like the days of like the Cisco admins and learning all the command shells and different things for like maintaining the Cisco router. Like I don't really see those much anymore.
I had that in talking about surprises. I had a call with a, pretty decent sized organization, 50 branches. And, again, the conversation started with security and with a CIO, CTO, and CISO all on the phone call. The thing that jumped out to the CIO was, wait, if we do this, just overlay managed firewall. If we do this, you're telling me I don't have to go hire a senior network guy. And I'm like, no. But again, that was kind of funny because I'm talking about, all the security, the UTM or unified threat protection, and all the higher level security and SOC services. And he's like, wait, let's go back to the net.
Like I can get one other person. Yeah, this kind of transfer of ownership type of thing. Yeah. I think of some of the other models too, like the Meraki's out there, Cisco Meraki, that kind of does like a really good job to kind of help maintain and manage multiple different nodes and things like that. I myself, even though I've configured tons of network appliances throughout the years though, but I don't see that as a primary job function anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're doing it for you, so no big deal.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of gives a little bit of peace of mind too, because I kind of like, as you said, as far as security goes, that's one of the common most pillars to have that. I see the network side of it, and the other thing that I see common is just patching in general. So I think kind of leading into that kind of same thing as far as security goes. How does 11.11 or anything kind of help with as far as patching and endpoint security?
So I'll touch on endpoint security. So as far as like OS patching or anything like that, we're not doing. We are obviously doing firmware upgrades on the firewalls, but if you move into, or I guess stay in the theme of NIST and you go to the detection and response, the detection side is okay. what do you have in your environment that's kicking off logs that we can use to monitor activity, right? So the SIM solution or managed SIM solution that we offer is more of an overwatch that's ingesting logs from anything that it will give it to us, really. But that could be routers, switches, firewalls, looking for behavior, obviously common threat activities to identify something nefarious in someone's environment. But just like anything else, it's people. I run into organizations all the time that have invested in the tool sets, SIM-like technologies, and they've deployed them and found out real quickly that they are super, super noisy and they have no idea what to do with all these alerts. So if it's pushing out 10,000 alerts a day, how much is the tool eliminating through automation, and then what raises up, and how much time in the day do they have to go research everything that pops? And I think they always find out that that's just not viable to do internally at a certain size. So
Right.
we see a lot of activity around taking over that, even if it's so we primarily work with Fortinet. So with FortiSIM, if someone has purchased and deployed FortiSIM already, and we just layer management on top, it's not uncommon for us to find, oh, there's persistence in your environment right now. I mean, you've invested in the tools, you've implemented it, but tweaking and tuning that tool set and figuring out what to do with the information is hard, which is why I think a lot of the MDR players, SIM players out there have kind of exploded, MSSPs across the, because there's a lot of people that need help, and I think they're starting to turn the corner and figuring out that that's something that's worth paying for.
It's a good solution. I would say Microsoft Sentinel was kind of one of those two. That Azure Sentinel, pardon me, that has part of that. And to your point, kind of kicking that off, which I did a couple of years ago, kind of not knowing what to do with it, it became more spammy than anything, than actual useful tool, than actually helped for certain vulnerabilities or alerts. I would get so much like informational alerts of either something that either not actionable or some of like automation stuff, to the point where actually some credible alerts actually would come. It would just kind of sit in the inbox and not even go, because I would think, oh, it's just some of the other things that I got, that new IP address log on or something that like nothing that's something that's as expected, and it just becomes a more spammy alerts.
Oh yeah, I mean, when everything's an emergency, nothing's an emergency. At least that's what all the operations people have been telling me my entire life on the sales side. But
it's true. Yeah, that's exactly.
But it gave me a good sense of, I guess that's probably true. If I escalate everything's going to get slowed down.
Right. That's operations in general, right? That's kind of the way
people specifically standing out in my mind right now, and they know who they are. But yeah, well, kind of going back to not only SIM, but inevitably when you talk about these kind of technologies, you're going to have to address the response, right? So everybody wants to talk about remediation.
Yep.
Remediation, kind of like cloud, needs to be defined, because there are a couple ways to look at that, right? So if we have an endpoint product installed and I have visibility and control of the endpoint, I have a lot more abilities to respond versus like a SIM solution that's, again, more overwatch. It's reactive, looking for indicators of compromise, so we can tell you what to look for. Whereas if we can implement an EDR type solution, again, we get a lot better information out of that endpoint, for one thing, from a monitoring standpoint, building behavioral analytics, I guess. And then you've got obviously kind of next gen AV built into there. So known bads start to get locked down a little more proactively just through automation. And then again, my people can proactively shut down activity on the workstation, and if we have the firewall, the network as well. So the more pieces and parts we have included, the more we can do proactively. But it is definitely not incident response, which is a different topic in and of itself.
Sure. Having that EDR solution, or even EDR, MDRs, a lot of those other security solutions out there, I think it's kind of pivotal in this days and age. I've seen the huge growth in it ever since COVID related, right? So it's everybody started like working from home, and everybody's outside of their own corporate networks, and so everybody still has a laptop. It's still company owned property, so having the ability to be able to put some of that endpoint security on there, I think, is definitely beneficial.
Yeah, I think in order of importance, and again, it falls outside of my linear path of the NIST cybersecurity framework, but getting EDR and firewall together is definitely the foundational layer. And then if you have the ability to throw SIM on top of that, it gives us a lot more visibility and the ability to kind of correlate between all the other appliances that are feeding us logs. But if we can get the network and endpoints squared away, that's going to eliminate a lot of the issues.
What do you see in the next as far as like trends go? I know security is probably like one of the biggest things on my like top 5 lists as far as trends go in the next couple of years as for IT. What do you see the industry kind of going and where the trends that are coming?
Well, when the best and worst thing about having a lot of tools in the bag is there's lots of trends to talk about, but you can go in a lot of different directions. The thing that has probably got me the most fired up about 1111 and some of the organizations we have acquired is more around the recovery side. So there's 3,500 vendors that are all duking it out in the MDR space. There's, tools that anyone can go buy, whether or not they have the people to implement them and manage them properly, they're available. And lots of activity in that space. But at the end of the day, when you put in all of these layers to protect the environment as a whole, prevent an attack, it's still not foolproof. There's no 100% SLA out there to prevent you from every possible scenario. So you have to look at what are we actually trying to protect, and that's the data. So on the data protection side, we've spent a long time over the last 5, 6, 7 years talking about the benefits of a good solid backup plan, disaster recovery plans, and provided the tools and services to make that a reality for the purposes of disasters. So, hey, I lose my server, or there's a tornado, hurricane, I need to fail over to another environment. Those technologies and services have been around for a long time, but now digging into simulating cyber events. So if you do get locked up, how do you identify the most recent clean version of your data? So we're not talking about RPOs and RTOs anymore. We're talking about at what point in time is your environment clean so we can recover this and not be, reinfected, if you will, or kind of relocked. How do you identify those points in time? How do you recover them? How do you test them in an isolated environment? Are you maintaining past configuration information, right? So if I'm pulling data from 60 days ago and I'm trying to stand it up, is it going to match the configuration of the environment now? Dev heavy shops are going to have more problems with that than others. But who's responsible for maintaining that? And the answer really is not many, if any, people, right? So
Sure.
Kind of the new frontier in the recovery space is how do you address recovering from ransomware without paying a ransom with the best shot of recovering all your data versus paying the ransom and hoping you get it back, right?
Right. And I almost want to say you had a saying if. I think it's more of a matter of kind of when now, really. I think once in a while, everybody's going to get hit with some type of attack of some sort. Hopefully it's not bad ransomware or anything like that. It's funny. I see trends. I didn't have recovery in my top 5 for some of the trends kind of that I'm seeing. I look in the next future and I see like a lot of these kind of serverless models and a lot of these like SaaS different approach. Like I'm trying to get to the point in my infrastructure where I'm completely serverless and I have no OS layer or anything behind that. And I'm trying to get to a point where I'm just running completely off of apps and functions. It's a huge step to kind of go that way. One, I look at either having I looked at having a solid backup plan. And I guess my idea was instead of kind of building a backup plan, is kind of push forward a little more and go to the next evolution of be completely serverless. Mm-hmm. Do you still see that world with people being like apps and functions as far as like a backup and recovery plan? I guess how would that fit into that role?
I honestly haven't spent a whole lot of time on the serverless environment, apps and functions, function as a service. I've been obviously hearing about it a lot through, AWS and some of the tool sets that they're making available. I just don't see a lot of companies moving towards it. It's just kind of like containers from a couple of years ago. Some of the large enterprise players are moving that way and experimenting with it, but I just don't see it in the small and mid-size organizations at all.
It's definitely a hard point to get to it. You have to get developers in mind and have to have that philosophy behind it in order to be like a serverless type of function.
Mhm.
That's kind of where my next gear is going, even for a security perspective as well. Because then I kind of lose the OS factor on it. I'm trying to lower my attack vector as much as possible, even through that. But they still have the firewalls, all that, and still have a lot of the the data sources and stuff that still can actually get attacked, because you're never 100% like clear of any type of like vulnerabilities. Like you said, there's still always some type of vulnerabilities that different organizations will still have, no matter if you're in the cloud, on-prem, or whatever. Just kind of like a local laptop. There's always that little points of you're going to get attacked eventually.
Bingo.
Um, do you see any other trends aside from like a recovery aspect or anything going to the future here?
I mean, again, I think that in our industry, the term cyber resilience is what is emerging right now. The combination of the protection and the recovery side together, right? I think that that's more near term. That's kind of emerging at this point, where we're trying to get that word out there to make it known. And we're not the only ones, but it's kind of highlighting that need for the, again, more near term. But forecasting 5 or 6 years down the road, I don't know that I'm the guy for that forecast.
Fair enough. Well, cool. Mac, it's been a pleasure talking with you today. Is there anything else that you'd like to say here before we go?
I don't think so, unless you want to jam and have Chat GPT write us a song or something like that.
Grab a little guitar and have a little sing along. I like it.
Always got them on. What kind of guitars you got back there?
I have, it's an old guitar. It's about, actually, I have one of the last American-made Fender Stratocasters.
Ooh, solid.
And I barely touch it because I'm afraid of like breaking it though, but that's one of the ones. And then I have an old Guild acoustic guitar that I still kind of play when I was in high school, which was a long time ago, 25 about years ago when I had it.
Okay. What's the model?
I don't know the model off the top of my head.
All right. I had a Guild. I actually sold my Guild for my Gibson SJ200, which is sitting right by me here. It is a wonderful piece of machinery here. But
that is a beautiful guitar. For people who are listening on the audio version, it is a beautiful kind of sun. What do they call that? A sunrise or sun something? The
back of the sunburst is the
sunburst. There you
go. Which actually my Guild was too. But it was funny, when I moved to Nashville, I came here with a Taylor guitar, which I come from the Northwest, which is pretty normal to have a Taylor Martin's, Callings a little bit. That's just a high price guitar, Breedlove, big, very popular guitars in the Northwest. When I moved to Nashville, however, they said you can't be a country singer and play a Taylor. Those are for chicks and worship leaders.
Yeah, that's hilarious. I've kind of heard that similar thing. That's funny.
So I had to go true up and get me. It was either Gibson or Martin out here for the countryside, but I didn't have a real jumbo guitar, so I went Gibson. It's a sweet sound for sure.
I'm actually looking at getting a classical guitar. I think that's the next thing. I want to get a Taylor classical. I don't know how I would do it in nylon strings. I'm kind of curious on that.
It's more of a picking style. You just get a whole new feel, which will encourage you to play more.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm kind of getting into. And I do have one guitar it's a cheap guitar. It's nothing crazy, but I think I got it from some type of monoprice warehouse sale. But it's a beautiful Sunrise. I always wanted a Les Paul Sunrise style, just to kind of have like a wall piece hanging on there. So it's a cheap knockoff brand, but it's a beautiful finish. It's a Les Paul body style with a Sunrise kind of finish on it that I got hanging up in my room there, that I just kind of see every now and then. It sounds horrible, but it looks beautiful. So it's one of the on the outside that kind of counts things, which is very cool.
Mm-hmm. Well, very good.
Well, awesome, man. Hey, I appreciate you taking the time to chat with us, and have a wonderful weekend, sir.
Yeah, likewise. We'll see you soon.